Hello again. Now, the Children's Institute says government is not doing enough to protect and prioritize the development and well-being of children. In a statement, the Institute has slammed the medium-term budget policy statement, which was presented to Parliament by Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana last week, Wednesday. The Institute says the policy statement is short-sighted and that it's continuing the path of austerity budgeting when increased social spending is needed. Well, let's discuss this further now with Kath Hall, Senior Researcher with the University of Cape Town's Children's Institute. Kath, good afternoon. Welcome to today and thank you very much for your time. Before we delve into the various aspects of your statement, just first an overriding question. Broadly speaking, you were disappointed with what the Minister had to say last week in terms of our children.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, we are disappointed in what he had to say because this medium-term budget was an opportunity to slightly reverse the austerity budgeting that we've been seeing. We're very concerned. We recognize that we're in a time of low economic growth and very high unemployment, but we don't believe that cutting back on social spending is the solution. If we think of the people of this country as the resource of this country, to cut back on the nutrition and the education of children is simply creating problems for the future. So we need to have well-nourished, well-educated, healthy children going into the future. And there are a number of ways in which we see these cuts in the budget.
Okay, so that is why you believe that the medium-term budget policy statement was short-sighted, because you just mentioned the word future twice in relation to education as well and in relation to children's nourishment. So what are the big ones for you? I mean, there's a poverty issue in the country, for example. We do have a child grant, but in your statement you say it's pretty much stagnant or static.
Yeah. In fact, worse than that, it's not static. The amount, the real value, the buying power of that grant has been reduced over time. So the child support grant, we see it as an excellent mechanism in times of high unemployment to ensure that children don't bear the cost of that unemployment by going hungry. And the child support grant, when it was introduced, was very explicitly aimed at covering the cost of food for a child. In other words, no child should go hungry, even if their families are unable to feed them an adequate diet. So the child support grant was pegged at that level. And because of inflation increases, the amount has increased a little bit each year, but those increases have been below the inflation in the cost of food. So now the child support grant is 510 Rand a month. The national food poverty line is 760 Rand a month. And the most recent data we have from 2022 shows that we expected child poverty rates to spike during lockdown, but they've continued to escalate since then. So we now have 38% of all children in the country, that's around nearly 8 million children, who are below the food poverty line. And this is a great concern because it means it's going to lead to rising rates of malnutrition, and then that in turn has impacts on children's health and ability to learn. We have very high stunting rates. We're a global outlier in the world in terms of our stunting rates, where literally a quarter of children under 5 are too short for their age because they've been chronically undernourished. So these things need to be reversed, and reversing them means expanding the budget, not contracting it.
Yeah, or increasing it by way above inflation rate, because even food inflation is very high.
Food inflation is very high. Food inflation, the grant was, the usual grant increases are in April, and the April to April increase between this year and last year, food inflation was 14.3%. But the CSG received an increase of 4.2%, so way below the cost of food inflation. So literally you can buy less bread, less vegetables, and it's particularly in those areas that you see very high food inflation.
So at the minimum,
is restore.
At the minimum, Kath, the food poverty line, you said is 760 Rand. and the child support grant is 500 odd. So at the minimum, you would expect it to be at 760, at least the very bare minimum or above that.
Well, yes, we now have very clear official national poverty lines that are published by Stats SA every year. This year, that poverty line is 760 Rand. And we're saying that child support grant needs to be restored to that level, which is what it was originally intended to be, to cover the cost of food. So yes, that is a big increase.
Yes.
It's more than an inflation increase to make up for years and years of loss of buying power.
Yeah.
Alongside this,
but we are not there yet. We are not there. We are sitting here at the place where you said we've in fact regressed value-wise in terms of the amount of the child support grant, and that's going to impact on nutrition and all of that. But we do have the extended COVID social grant, the COVID social relief distress grant. It's just been extended by another year. You don't see that helping in some way at all? There's no impact of that on children?
It definitely will help, and we're very pleased to see that one-year extension. We were not surprised to see it because we knew that it would be political suicide at this point to not extend it with an election year coming up. What we need to see is have that temporary grant that was introduced in 2020 made part of the permanent grants program. South Africa is, it's doing well in that it's one of the few countries in the world that implemented a disaster relief grant and has continued with that disaster relief grant. The difference that it makes for children is that it's the first time there has been any grant, any social assistance for adults who are working age who cannot work because there are no jobs. And so in the absence of that grant, what was happening in households, or what does happen in households, is that unemployed adults who live with children also have to share in the value of the child support grant, and it means there's less of that grant available to spend on the child. So really important to have that money coming into the household. But again, there are all kinds of concerns about that SRD for unemployed adults. Like the amount has not increased. It's still 350 Rand, and this is 4 years later. And there's the BPS announced that there would be another 34 billion Rand for this grant next year. But that doesn't allow for an increase in the grant. It also doesn't allow for an increase in the number of people who are eligible. The means test is out of date. It's linked to a poverty line from 2 years ago.
So there's a lot of work to be done to really bring it up to a level that would be acceptable and assist with the food poverty at the minimum. Perhaps that action is a universal basic income grant. What is your view on that, by the way, as a children's institute? Do you think a universal basic income grant would assist?
Yes. Well, we do, and it would resolve all kinds of problems around exclusion errors. We know that many, for example, with the child support grant, many children who are eligible are not able to get it, and those are often the most vulnerable children. Making it universal could help. With the SRD as well, we're seeing huge errors of exclusion because of the way in which people have to prove their eligibility.
Yeah, but also a universal basic income grant might benefit as well the young parents. We've got so many young mothers and young fathers in the country who are unemployed. I just want us to shift now from this issue of grants to the issue of the ECDs, because in your statement you also make a point that early childhood development is not getting the support it is getting. In fact, the budget allocated for it has been cut by 50 million Rand.
Yes. And in fact, at the same time as that, the conditional grant for maintenance expenditure for ECDs has been cut by 50 million Rand. At the same time, there's been an additional 50 million Rand added to VIP protection services. So there's a strange set of priorities going on. We understand that this 50 million Rand cut in ECD was because of the departments were slow to expend it. But we think that where there are difficulties in expending budget, those departments need to be allowed time, assisted, supported. They could have been able to partner with NGOs to expend that money. That maintenance money is really to ensure that ECD facilities are able to register so that they can receive subsidy for the children who go there. And it's quite a complicated process registering, because you've got to meet all kinds of health and regulatory requirements. And not all of the ECD centres are able to do this. So that grant is really important because it helps ECD facilities to do that. Far too few ECD facilities receive subsidy from government, which means that households have to pay out of their pockets for early childcare.
No, in fact, the cut is the cut is just under 60 million. Sorry, I said 50. It's about 58 million. I just looked at the statement again. But the point is there's an impact on the health and safety of young kids if the maintenance conditional grant is being reduced.
Yes, well, of course. Ideally, we want ECD facilities to be compliant with the minimum norms and standards that make those places safe. So removing that budget and forcing and denying ECD the assistance they need to become compliant simply means that more children will attend places where they may be at risk. We also are concerned in relation to ECD that, the subsidy that is received even for registered ECDs has not changed since 2019. So again, we're seeing regression in government budgeting.
Okay.
So, I mean, that subsidy is 17 Rand per learner per day, and that's got to include everything, including the meals that are offered to those children. And that has not been increased.
Yeah. Lastly, Kath, while I still have you, lastly, is the issue of protecting our children. Child protection and social welfare services. In your statement, you say they are under threat. In a nutshell, why are they under threat?
Okay. Well, child protection services and welfare services in general. So this includes old age homes. It includes shelter for women who have been abused, who are survivors of GBV. Services for orphans and vulnerable children, services for families who need support, for disabled people with disabilities. All of these services fall within a broad area of social welfare services, which fall under the Department of Social Development. But the department does not deliver all of these services. It delivers some. We don't have nearly enough social workers in the country, but posts have been frozen. But actually a large bulk of these services are delivered by NPOs, so like child welfare and others, who historically have received funding from the Department of Social Development to assist them in delivering those services. And we've seen budget cuts over the years to these NPOs, which means many have had to close down, many have had to cut the services that they offer. And our concern with this medium-term budget is that, this year there was a national agreement at national level for a 7.5% increase in salaries for government employees. So that's the public sector wage bill. Treasury was concerned they had not budgeted for this. Goodness knows why, because one expects salary increases each year. But it had not been budgeted for. So they had to look around for budget, and they've made additional allocations available for the police services, for provinces to pay in the areas of health and of education. But they've explicitly said there is no allocation for provinces to pay the increased salary bill for within social development. So that money's got to come from somewhere. So provinces have got to honour the wage agreement that National has made. They can't get rid of staff. They can't not pay those. So that money is probably going to come out of the budget for welfare services. And we're very worried about further cuts for NPOs because they really are providing huge important services for the most vulnerable people.
Hopefully the National Treasury will be listening to your voices and others ahead of February. When they present the next budget ahead of the elections, they will behave differently. Thank you very much, Kath Hall. She's a researcher there with the University of Cape Town's Children's Institute.